World War I left a residue of surplus aircraft and an abundance of trained pilots eager to return to the air. Perfect conditions for aviation's expansion into more commercial markets. Along with the establishment of air mail service, 1919 would mark the beginning of scheduled air travel. Both France and Britain would introduce regular passenger air travel between London and Paris. The French flew Farman Goliaths, while the British employed Handley Page and Dehavilland post-war bombers. The Paris-London route was soon crowded with international air travel. 8 airline companies came into existence in 1919, 3 British and 5 French. Most of the major aircraft manufacturers began directing their designing attention towards passenger travel. German designer Hugo Junkers developed the first all-metal 3-engine monoplane airliner. During the war, Junkers' ideas had been considered too advanced for large-scale production, but he achieved great success with a series of more efficient airliners. His Ju-52 3M was notable as both an airliner and as a troop transport in World War II. The leading Dutch designer, Anthony Fokker, soon followed with his trimotor aircraft called the F-7. It was the first long-range trimotor, utilizing Fokker's original wooden wing design. The F-7 was a great success and became the standard for the time in airline design. It was the F-7 that carried Lieutenant Commander Richard E. Byrd on the first flight over the North Pole, and Australian Kingsford Smith in the first non-stop flight between Australia and the United States. A year later, Henry Ford's aircraft factory would also produce a trimotor. Ford based the design of his Tin Goose on Fokker's F-7, except that the Goose was all metal. The Tin Goose became the first successful passenger aircraft built in America. The United States lagged behind in passenger transport, but a handful of ex-barnstormers helped propel the U.S. ahead. The names Beech, Cessna, Weaver, and Lindberg were as synonymous with barnstorming as they were with aircraft development. It was Lindbergh's transatlantic solo flight in 1927 that would give the United States its prominence in aviation. Lindbergh's arrival in France was met with enthralled crowds. This feat signified that transatlantic flight was truly possible. His flight captured the world's imagination. 2 other barnstormers, Clayton Bruckner and Elwood Junkin, brought us the Waco. Friends since high school, Bruckner and Junkin together created one of the first successful cabin-class biplanes. Here today with the restored Waco is former test pilot and director of the Santa Monica Flying Museum, Don Madonna.
The beauty of this airplane is its simplicity. It has 2 ailerons, excellent roll response, no flaps, propeller is solid propeller. You can't control the propeller, you can't control the flaps. It's easy to fly. It's a tailwheel airplane. You lift the tail up and off it goes. Interesting braking and ground handling is a little tricky on it. It's got a manual handle that you pull and you differential the rudders for braking. When you pull the handle, it brakes the left side if you have the left rudder depressed, and vice versa for the right. Stagger wing just gives you a little Venturi effect to go through between the wings, just like on the stagger wing Beech, and you get a little more performance out of it. Another reason they use this is for the torque box and the strength that you get from the structural strength that you get from the 2 wings. But with the big round engines, they needed they were right at the limit on aerodynamic ability to pull the airplanes through, and they got a little bit of increased efficiency for wing area here. It's nearly 61 years old, 60 years old now, built in 1931, and it's a glorious airplane for what it was designed to do, and the fact that it still does it very well. When you get inside, you smell and feel the wood that's in there and the aroma that's there. It's a gorgeous airplane.
Flying boats were a practical solution to a major aviation dilemma: where to land. Airports with long paved runways were distant dreams, leaving a pilot faced with rugged and uneven terrain for a landing field. Water supplied the perfect runway. Glenn Curtiss was the great pioneer of waterborne aircraft. He flew the first successful boat-hulled airplane in 1912. Curtiss was also the first to use the application of a stepped hull to break the water's suction during takeoff. Claude Dornier, a German designer, introduced the most spectacular flying boats. The Dornier Wall became one of his most successful. Built in 1922, it flew for several early airlines, and in 1930 became the first flying boat to complete an east-west Atlantic crossing. The DO-10 was introduced in 1929, a monstrous boat with a 157-foot wingspan. She was the largest plane of her time. The DO-10 proved to be impractical for mass production. Dornier's DO-26 was one of the most beautiful flying boats ever built. She had a streamlined hull, 4 engines, and retractable stabilizing floats. England's Short brothers, designers of aircraft that could cope with engine failure in flight, turned their attention to flying boats after the war. They produced an entire line of flying boats under the Empire name. In Italy, the Savoia company became known for their production of flying boats. The Savoia Marchetti S-55 was a remarkable flying boat. She had a twin hull, an open cockpit, and very thick wings. In 1926, the S-55 set 14 world records for speed, altitude, and distance. Flying boats enabled America to extend its political, commercial, and trading interests to far-off lands. Sikorsky aircraft pioneered almost every international air route. When the Sikorsky S-38 took to the air in 1928, people were amazed. There was no other amphibious plane that could perform as she did. She carried 10 passengers and crew at a cruising speed of 100 miles per hour. It was with Sikorsky aircraft that Pan American became the first global airline company. Pan American's Clipper line was the first to tour Pacific and Asian destinations. These flying boats were massive 4-engine planes with room for 48 passengers and a crew of 6. When the China Clipper headed for Hong Kong, thousands gathered to watch her depart San Francisco's Bay. President Roosevelt cabled the crew upon her arrival. Heartfelt congratulations of an air-minded sailor. I thrill to the wonder of it all. In 1939, the PBY Catalina became the first seaplane to fly around the world. Considered by many to be the greatest flying boat of all, it was manufactured in greater numbers than any other. As pilot Roscoe Creed remembered it, it was a mercy ship, a torpedo bomber, a cargo and passenger plane. It was slow, prone to vibrate, heavy on the controls, but it was dependable. It was tough. This is the PBY-5A, the fifth version of this versatile aircraft. Some consider this the best PBY ever produced. It was the first amphibious version offering both land and sea operations. To the surprise of many designers, adding landing gear did not lower its airspeed. And when the gear was extended into the water, it acted as a sea anchor, increasing control and stability. This plane was built in 1944 and was converted to private use in the 1980s. In 1985, it was flown in a recreation of the first flight across the Atlantic Ocean by the NC-4 in 1919. Upon landing in Plymouth, it hit a mooring buoy and was seriously damaged. However, pilot and owner Robert Franks rebuilt the plane into its present condition. The PBY was originally introduced as a bomber, but its slow speed made daylight bombing impractical. Some were painted black and used for night bombing. Flying at just under 200 miles per hour, they were ideal for reconnaissance, electronic countermeasures, and submarine hunting. PBYs accounted for a third of all submarines destroyed by the Navy. Shortly before Douglas developed the DC series of airliners, Boeing had created its 247. The 247 was a twin-engine, all-metal aircraft. It proved highly successful until it was overshadowed by Douglas's new DC series. The DC series was born from another plane's ashes. In 1930, TWA had a commercial transport business made up of Fokker F-10s called the Lindberg line. They were the symbol of safety until one of the tri-motor's wooden wings broke up in a thunderstorm, sending 8 people to their death. In the aftermath, wooden wings were outlawed on America's commercial transports. Desperate for a replacement aircraft, TWA sent this letter to other manufacturers. We will buy 10 or more all-metal 12-passenger tri-motor airliners. Donald Douglas would later call TWA's letter the birth certificate of the modern airliner. It led to the prototype DC-1, then the DC-2 offshoot, and finally, the DC-3. The DC-3 was an instant success. She combined safety, speed, comfort, reliability, and low operating costs. The DC-3 is considered the single most significant aircraft in the history of civil aviation. She made passenger travel economically viable. Pilot Ernest Gann would recall her as an amiable cow grazing placidly in the higher pasture lands, marvelously forgiving of the most clumsy pilot. As World War II approached, the DC-3 had already established itself as the world's passenger airliner. It was not surprising that the DC-3 would be immediately commissioned for military use and renamed the C-47. The C-47 transport carried everything to the front. Paratroopers, spare parts, heavy equipment, food and provisions, even gliders. Its crew used to say, "You call, we'll haul." The plane flew rescue missions, secret sorties, and even functioned as a fighter. In the words of one pilot, it ran hot, it ran cold, it ran rough. It staggered along on hot days and scared you half to death. Its wings flexed and twisted in a horrifying manner. It sank back to earth with a great sigh of relief. But it flew, and flew, and flew. Many of these durable aircraft are still flying today. Pilot Steve Hinton of the Planes of Fame Air Museum finds the DC-3 a pleasure to fly.
Well, the DC-3 is a real stable airplane, real stable. You can trim it up and take your hands off it and it'll fly itself. It doesn't have any real bad characteristics at all. The DC-3, the only problem I could say that comes to mind is, let's say, single engine performance when the airplane's heavy, but that would be something you'd expect with only twin engine power. You know, if you lose one, you lose 50% of your thrust. But the airplane is real easy to fly. There's really no bad habits to speak of at all.
Compared with other aircraft of its day, the DC-3 is a bold departure from its contemporaries. Pilot Javier Arango speculates on the reasons for the revolutionary design of the DC-3.
The design was done by Donald Douglas of the famous McDonald Douglas Aircraft Corporation. And that airplane is really the one that put that company into aviation. They were at that point, I think, much less concerned on achieving flight itself, and they were already starting to look at achieving fast flight, comfortable flight, and at carrying capacity. The wing of the DC series is quite different from, again, comparing the Ford Tri-Motor, which has a very, very thick wing, a high lift wing as it's known, in order to make up for lack of power on the engines and lack of aerodynamic shape of the aircraft. The DC-3 could afford a different shape of wing that allowed it to have more speed. And in doing that, it gives up a little more lift. But things had improved to the point where that marginal reduction of lift as compared to the big fat wing was overcompensated by the extra speed that the airplane could fly at. The DC-3 is probably known as the best airplane that was ever created because it could do literally everything. For its time, there was no airplane that could carry as much at such an economical rate and for the distances that the DC-3 could carry. That airplane was strong enough and modern enough that it could operate in bad weather. It had the speed to fight headwinds. It had the load capacity to carry extra fuel and go all over the world. And it had the reliable systems to allow it to do that without having to stop for maintenance at every stop. And all that allowed it to be an incredibly versatile airplane. Whatever you wanted, a DC-3 could be adapted to. It is quite an aerodynamic aircraft, perhaps not from the perspective of 1990, but if you look at what was around in 1930, that is a very slick, fast airplane.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification icon for the latest videos as they are released. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next one. Ciao for now.